This was the UN Security Council in August 2015 on Syria chemical weapons. What follows are stakeouts a year later in August 2016 after the first report was issued.
Exchanging our analysis of the regime reports during the consultations in Syria.
Do you think violations of the chemical weapons convention should be, met with some sort of punishment?
Maybe I could come back to after our discussion. Let me say that the thing, Jim did whatever they could. They worked very hard and very professional. So this is what we need to do as well.
Should the gym be extended?
I wouldn't rule it out. So but we'll
Time for sanctions? Time for sanctions?
no.
Time for sanctions as a follow-up? We'll talk to you after.
We'll be waiting here.
Oh.
About the session before us. First of all, I welcome the fact that the Joint Investigative Mechanism report concludes what we have known and believed for a long time, which is that the Assad regime has been responsible for the use of chemical weapons attacks in Syria. We're also very concerned by its conclusions on the use of sulfur mustard by Daesh. The Syrian regime has been found to have used chlorine gas against civilians in Syria. That is a war crime, and everyone responsible for those war crimes must be held accountable and dealt with accordingly. In fact, the Jim report could have gone even further. It notes that barrel bombs were allegedly used in all 8 of the chlorine-related cases. It states that barrel bombs can only be deployed from helicopters, and it says that the armed opposition groups didn't have the capability to fly helicopters at the relevant places at times. So the only logical conclusion is that the Syrian regime were also responsible for those other cases. And the Jim will come back to us before the end of its mandate next month with final conclusions on 3 of those additional cases where the regime is heavily implicated. We also need to take account of the OPCW report from July, which concluded that gaps, inconsistencies and discrepancies remain in Syria's account of its declaration, and that the Syrian regime has failed to provide the required transparency. The Jim noted through their report that despite repeated requests, the Syrian regime did not provide the information requested, and where information was given, the Jim discredited the Syrian narrative. So this leads us to believe that Syria is highly likely to seek to preserve chemical weapon capabilities, and that we are likely to see the continued use of toxic chemicals as weapons, very sadly. Syria's response shows a clear pattern of behaviour, which demonstrates that the Syrian government is not prepared either to take its international obligations seriously or to abide by international law. It's therefore essential that we have a robust international response, as we all unanimously decided to do when we passed Resolution 2118. And let me quote from that resolution. It says that we decide, in the event of non-compliance with this resolution, including any use of chemical weapons in Syria, to impose measures under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter. So we must work together, in response to your question, within established legal mechanisms to seek justice for the victims of these heinous weapons and to ensure that the use of chemical weapons by anyone, anywhere, stops. Anything less than that would be a failure of this Council and of international mechanisms and of all of our governments collectively.
So, Ambassador, along with imposing sanctions, would you like to see a resolution imposing sanctions and referring Syria to the ICC?
Well, we haven't begun that discussion yet. That is what today's session will begin to do. But the sorts of things that we'll be looking at will be the imposition of a sanctions regime and some form of accountability within international legal mechanisms. Yeah.
And would you have any success with Russia on this?
Well, let's begin the discussion where it comes that Russia was absolutely instrumental in the creation of this joint investigative mechanism, working constructively with the United States, and so let's hear what they have to say, but I would expect them to want the conclusions of their labours, the fruits of their labours, this report, to lead to action, and that means action both against Daesh and against the regime.
Ambassador, about Syria again, the Turkey just entered the war recently. What's the UK's position about it?
The UK position is that we stand shoulder to shoulder with Turkey, both in this fight against terrorism and as a front line in Syria. Turkey has the right to defend itself, and we're working very closely with Turkey. Turkey is a leading member of the International Syria Support Group and will be instrumental in finding a final resolution to the ongoing conflict in Syria.
Okay.
Should the gym be extended? Should the gym be
No.
extended?
Ambassador, reaction
You don't
on the
think the
first
gym?
poll? SG reaction?
My reaction is that the third straw poll crystallised and stabilised the situation for the vast majority of candidates. There's not a huge amount of movement, with one exception. My chat who went very strongly up. I think Antonio Guterres has established now 3 straw polls running that he is the leading candidate, and I think there are a number of candidates who aren't getting close to the 9 positive votes and no vetoes that they would need to win this race.
Did Andrew Mitchell speak in any way to the government? Andrew Mitchell's piece about Ms. Bokova?
One thing about the chemical, the use of chemical weapons in Syria, which is immensely important. Our position is that if there is one thing that must unite the Security Council, it is the fight against the proliferation and use of weapons of mass destruction. And if there is one area in which weakness is not an option, this is it. So we simply have no right to fail here. This is my first message. Secondly, the GIM report closely establishes responsibilities with respect to the use of chemical weapons in Syria. This is unprecedented in such a way in the history of the UN. This is why neither weakness nor inaction is an option. Beyond the situation in Syria, what is at stake here is the future of the non-proliferation regime, which is a backbone of international peace and security. What is also at stake is the credibility of the Security Council and of the UN system. Each of us will be accountable for it. This is why France favors a quick and strong Security Council response based on 2 elements. One, renewing the GIM mandate for 1 year at least, and giving it increased and broader investigative means than those provided by Resolution 2235 last year. And number 2, imposing sanctions on those who are responsible for these acts, which are constitutive of war crimes and crimes against humanity. So we need a resolution, and we need a resolution with teeth. The fight against WMD, weapons of mass destruction, is an existential fight that must transcend differences in the Security Council over Syria. That is why it is so critically important for all the members of the Security Council to join forces in this fight. This must be our common fight. This is what I wanted to tell you before.
So no referral to the ICC?
Remains to be seen, but at this stage what we want is to unite the Security Council in a very strong way.
Ambassador, one question about the Turkish just entered the war in Syria.
Something really different for our next conversation, okay?
Thanks, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Vive la France. So, what we can say is UK Ambassador Rycroft, very much on Syria, also speaking on next SG, question about Andrew Mitchell and his former UK minister, now aligned with the new powers, it would seem. His piece on Bokova, whether that was in any way coordinated with the UK, we'll see if we get an answer on that. And then Monsieur François Delattre, he did not, and there was no time to revive the Western Sahara question now that it appears that the Council has been told of violations. But to be continued, U.S. power is on her way.
Not today. First, let me say that this GIM report that we are about to go and discuss as a council for the first time is extremely important. It's a landmark report. It is the first official, independent confirmation of what many of us have alleged for a long time. Many of us have presented substantial evidence of for a long time, and that is a pattern of chemical weapons used by the Syrian regime. When we as a UN Security Council set up the Joint Investigative Mechanism, we did so in order to deter regime use, to seek to deter regime use and non-state actor use, and in order to establish a mechanism for pointing the finger at individuals or entities who are involved in that use. We now have, again, the fruits of that long effort, and it is incumbent on the Council to act swiftly to show that when we put that joint investigative mechanism in place, we were serious about there being meaningful accountability on the back end. I can't specify or get ahead of where the Council is going to be. You all heard from Ambassador Churkin, I think last week, on the preliminary discussions that we have had, but we also know that given that on any given day we continue to hear allegations of regime use, it is extremely important that the Council moves swiftly to ensure that anybody who would perpetrate this crime, anybody who would erode decades, nearly a century of progress in building an international norm would pay a price.
Will you try again for an ICC referral?
Okay, so that was the P3 trifecta. Rycroft of the UK, who also took a question on NextSG. Francis Delattre, who did not, in this case, address Western Sahara. And the U.S., who didn't actually take any questions at all, although at the end, actually after the prepared remark, was asked about a referral, whether they'll seek an ICC referral in the Council, and said, we'll see what the traffic will bear. Some might say that about the Saudi-led coalition's airstrikes in Yemen as well, but that, of course, is another story to be continued.